Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at some of our top stories. Both the US and Israel have criticised a French plan to recognise a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly. Israel Katz calls the move a surrender to terrorism, as humanitarian agencies say Gaza is running out of specialised food to save malnourished children. Delegations from Iran and the E3 nations of Germany, France and the UK have arrived ahead of diplomatic talks on Iran's nuclear activity. The E3 leaders have threatened snapback UN sanctions amid nuclear tensions following Iran's 12-day war with Israel and US intervention. Thailand has reportedly rejected third-party mediation as tensions with Cambodia worsen following military action along the border. At least 16 civilians have died as fears intensify over the threat of all-out war. India's Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal says he is optimistic of a US trade deal ahead of the August 1st deadline. Meanwhile, South Korea's Industry Minister has met with US Commerce Secretary, reaffirming a commitment to reaching a deal by the end of the month. The Kremlin says that it is unlikely that a peace deal on the war in Ukraine will be completed in 30 days. Meanwhile, Ukraine says a global Starlink outage has hit its military communications as peace efforts continue to stall. The Philippine Supreme Court has blocked an impeachment trial against Sara Duterte. The vice president was accused of misusing public funds and threatening to kill President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. by the lower house of the Philippine Parliament. US media reports suggest that Fed Chair Jerome Powell is privately adamant on serving out his full term, despite a continued dispute with Donald Trump. The US president made jibes at Powell in person and has previously publicly spoken about wanting to fire the Fed chair. And Saudi Arabia has signed off on a $6.4 billion deal with Syria to rebuild infrastructure, telecoms and the economy following the ousting of Bashar al-Assad. International efforts have intensified as Syria tries to recover after more than a decade of civil war. But we start in the Middle East, and Gaza is reportedly on the brink of a humanitarian disaster as supplies of life-saving therapeutic food for malnourished children dwindle. UNICEF warns that stocks of ready-to-use therapeutic food, a crucial treatment for severe acute malnutrition, could run out by mid-August. Over 20,000 cases have been reported since April, according to Gaza's health ministry. Salim Owais, spokesperson for UNICEF, raised the following points.
Aid and humanitarian supplies inside the Gaza Strip are running out. UNICEF has already ran out of preventive nutritional supplies, and now we are facing a dire situation that we are running out of therapeutic supplies. We only have 3,000 cartons. That's equivalent of treating only 3,000 children, and that's really dangerous for children as they face hunger and malnutrition at the moment. UNICEF has seen significant increase in the rates of malnutrition among children. We've seen a higher number of admitted children to treatment in May, June, and now July. We reached a daily rate, average rate of 200 children daily admitted to treatment, and that's only the children that we were able to reach with this.
Well, this comes after a historic move as French President Emmanuel Macron announced that France will recognise a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly in September, the first G7 nation to do so. The decision has been praised by Palestinian leaders, Saudi Arabia and Spain, who say it reinforces support for a two-state solution, though Israel and the US have condemned the move. Well, joining us to discuss the ongoing situation in Gaza, Dr. Pansara Amarasinghe from the Kotalawala Defence University, joining us live from Colombo in Sri Lanka. Dr. Amarasinghe, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Let's first look at the situation on the ground. Warnings now being put out about the vital aid needed for malnourished children in order for them to potentially have their lives saved. Those numbers dwindling and concern is arising. What's your first opinion on those statements that we've heard and the significance of them in the face of wider issues around food and aid supplies? Well, while we wait for Dr. Amarasinghe, I'm just holding on. Can you hear me okay, Dr. Amarasinghe?
Yeah, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. So I just wanted to first touch on the issues surrounding a lack of aid for malnourished children. How significant is this amongst the wider issues around aid and food getting into the Gaza Strip, causing a potentially worsening humanitarian crisis?
Yeah, of course, for the past 24 hours, dozens of Palestinian civilians have been reported to be dead in Gaza, which is simply deteriorating the whole situation. And from a strategic point of view, what Jerusalem wants to accomplish is to somehow to create a huge impact upon the Gaza population, because all the conditions, whatever the conditions initiated by Israel to create a ceasefire agreement with Hamas has not been productive, as Hamas has come up with unconditional, different conditions. So the food, the crisis, and the malnutrition crisis, and this huge, tremendous issue which we are witnessing from Gaza is simply connected to the greater strategic imperative of Israeli government. But at the same time, we need to understand that recently the UN Agency for the Palestinian Refugees has made an official statement indicating that if this situation continues, right, so this will be a nightmare for the civil population in Gaza. And with all these circumstances, what we can see quite clearly from the international front is that there's a huge, a terrible, a tremendous pressure rising upon Israeli regime. So for example, a couple of days ago, Macron from France has declared that France is likely to acknowledge, to accept the statehood of Palestinian Authority in coming September, which is a big blow on the strategic visions of Israel. So actually what we can see from this, the food crisis in Gaza is likely to continue if unless the international community won't make any significant changes.
Yes, Dr. Amarasinghe, let's now bring it away from the Gaza Strip and the situation on the ground. Let's now look at diplomacy. Of course, France announcing that they are going to recognise a Palestinian state at the UN Security Council meeting. What's the significance of this? And do you think that we might see other countries following suit in the face of further pressure from dozens of countries on Israel over the current situation in Gaza?
Yeah, currently there's a huge outcry going on around the world against Israeli regime in Tel Aviv, especially the Netanyahu's government, despite the fact that Israel has recorded a number of significant military victories by crushing Hamas leaders one by one since 2023 October. Despite having had all these military victories, there's a huge outcry going on. Especially, we must understand that the European Union leaders, the countries in European Union, think twice about continuing their free trade agreement with Israel. I think even in one of my previous statements, I mentioned that Netherlands last month considered, they thought twice of renewing the trade deal with Israel. So all in all, what we can see is that if this situation in Gaza goes to be volatile and stern towards the civilians, we can see a huge of the dissenting opinion coming mainly from the Western world, especially from Europe. And strategically and traditionally, most of the European countries have been favorable allies to Israel since its inception, right? Even after the 7th of October massacre in 2023, their perceptions remain unchanged. They already accepted Israel's right for the self-defense. But what we are seeing at the moment is quite contrary to what they initially thought. the public opinion and the state opinion, the diplomatic opinion is working against Israel instead of working in favor of them.
Yes, Dr. Pansara Amarasinghe, thank you ever so much for taking the time to join us. We will, of course, continue to bring you all of the updates from Gaza, both diplomatically and on the ground. But we move on now and head over to Europe, where Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has reportedly stated that they have progressed towards a Putin-Zelensky meeting. He further stated that the war needs to end, which will begin with a meeting of leaders. But Russia's senior negotiator, Vladimir Medinsky, said a summit should only happen to sign a final agreement and not during ongoing talks. The Kremlin has also dismissed hopes for a quick peace deal with Ukraine, saying it's obviously unlikely, though, that such a complex process can be wrapped up in just 30 days. This comes after a brief round of talks in Istanbul, where Russia and Ukraine agreed on a prisoner swap but made little headway on a ceasefire or a leaders' summit. Ukraine's delegation, led by former Defence Minister Rustem Umerov, proposed a Zelensky-Putin summit by the end of August, with possible participation from US President Donald Trump and Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Well, joining us is Glenn Grant, ex-advisor to Ukrainian Defence Minister, who's joining us live from Riga, Latvia. Glenn, as always, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. The Kremlin responding to these comments from Ukraine, saying that a deal is unlikely to happen within 30 days, and also saying that that meeting between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky will only take place at the end of these discussions. What, in your opinion, is the Russian incentive behind this? And do you think that this could be an attempt, potentially, that some experts say Russia is continuing to want to extend this war rather than resolve it as soon as possible?
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. I don't think that's just some experts. I mean, this is what Russia is saying. Generally, all the people in Russia that one talks to are basically saying that the war is going to continue until Putin has reached his objectives, or Ukraine capitulates. And Ukraine is not about to capitulate. That is quite clear from the huge response of people onto the streets this last few days, showing that the aim is to win and to move towards Europe. So I'm not sure what cards Zelensky thinks he's playing with, but they're not ones that are really, I'm going to say, obvious to everybody else, except trying to keep Donald Trump on side.
Yes, you mentioned Donald Trump, Glenn. Do you think he could be a factor in pushing this meeting of both leaders of Ukraine and Russia forward? If he is the one that suggests it, do you think that could move the needle?
No, because he has no leverage at all with Russia. I mean, he's already spoken to Putin, goodness knows how many times. And Putin has made it absolutely clear to Donald Trump that he's going to keep going until he wins. So this is a game, you could say, for Zelensky playing to just try and keep Trump engaged, to show him that we're the good guys, we're trying hard, but Russia isn't. But frankly, you've got to be really the level of 7-year-olds when you're dealing with Donald Trump. So it's, Russia's taking its ball home sort of thing about football. I think this is getting to be really a bit pathetic, but this is how it is.
Glenn, I want to look at the dates that Russia have given, of course, saying it is unlikely, obviously unlikely, that any deal would be agreed in 30 days. We know Donald Trump himself has given a deadline as well of 50 days in recent times. Do you think Russia will meet the US deadline? And if they don't, do you think the US will actually follow through with their threatened sanctions on Russia and third-party tariffs on nations that purchase Russian oil?
No, I don't think Trump will do anything of any significance if Russia doesn't meet the 50 days. And Russia said it's not going to. So that, with the line, I think, from Lavrov, something saying, we've heard it all before, and we're not worried about sanctions, and they're not. I mean, I think the two or three things that people ought to bear in mind is that Russia has a Zapad exercise in September, and the planning for that is going ahead strongly. and including sort of moving electronic warfare systems closer to the Estonian border. And that Zapad exercise is in Belarusia, which of course is right next to the Baltic states, but equally is also along the whole of the Ukrainian northern border. And Russia has used Zapad exercises to attack places before, including Georgia. So I think that we'll see nothing before Zapad happens, and then we'll see whether Zapad is a dress rehearsal for attacking the Baltic states or a dress rehearsal for another attack on the, you could call it the soft northern side of Ukraine.
Glenn, let's look forward now as we bring an end to our discussion. I'm sensing not a lot of optimism over the current rhetoric from the United States. I'm also sensing that you're not very optimistic over a deal happening anytime soon between Russia and Ukraine. So where, in your opinion, does this go next?
I mean, the war is going to continue exactly the same as it's going on at the moment. I mean, Petrovsk is probably going to fall soon if it hasn't fallen already. There are a couple of other places that are close to falling. Putin's going to keep going on those. But I really think that next is the Zapad exercise, and that we're not, everything until then is rhetoric. When we actually see what Russia is going to commit into Belarusia in September, then we'll get an idea of, as we did before 14, as we did before 24, we'll get an idea of what Russia is going to do with its battle intentions next.
Glenn Grant, as always, thank you so much for your time and for joining us as peace talks continue, or at least talk of peace continues. We will continue to bring you all of those updates as we get them. But we move on now, and tensions are running high in Taiwan ahead of a key vote this weekend that could shift the balance of power in the island's legislature. Voters will decide whether to recall 24 lawmakers from the China-friendly opposition Nationalist Party, also known as the KMT, a move pushed by supporters of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, also known as the DPP. The recall efforts comes amid growing frustration over legislative gridlock and concerns that the KMT is blocking defence funding while maintaining warm ties with Beijing. The DPP won the presidency last year but fell short of a legislative majority. If these recalls succeed, special elections could follow, giving the DPP a chance to tip the scales in Parliament. But the KMT is pushing back hard, calling the move a political power grab and a threat to Taiwan's multi-party democracy. China, meanwhile, has dismissed the whole process, calling it futile against what it claims is the inevitable reunification of Taiwan with the mainland. We'll listen now to some of the protesters who are on the ground.
就是有看到说国民党删预算那些的，我觉得有点夸张，有点甚至到他们怎么当上这个工作的程度，然后还有各式各样的，也会有这个也有对我的工作有点影响，所以就觉得说应该要支持。
我觉得不希望再一次上卡掉，对，然后希望是今天大家出来的话都可以投同意，不管你是投同意不同意，但是就是要出来投票，因为这个是投票是我们民主的权利。
Well, joining us is Ross Feingold, a political analyst from Taipei in Taiwan, to discuss this further. Ross, it's difficult for us to summarise the situation in just a short read there. So could you provide some context for us, please, on what this situation is and how important it could be, of course, in the face of questions from China about reunification and also intense and continuous drills from around the island from China as well?
The frustration for the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, which controls the presidency and the executive branch of government, is that they only have a minority in Taiwan's legislative yuan, or the parliament. And the majority is a combination of other political parties and independents. So ever since the president took office in May of 2024, his relationship with the opposition-led legislature has been terrible. The opposition-led legislature has passed a number of laws to try and expand their own power of oversight over the executive branch. Some of those powers were invalidated by Taiwan's constitutional court. And the opposition-led legislature has also frozen parts of government department budgets, which has also led to frustration by the executive branch. And civil society organizations allied with the DPP brought forward these recall elections. They were able to qualify 24 opposition party legislators to face recall elections. Another 7 opposition legislators will face a recall on August 23rd. So we actually have 2 different voting days and a total of 31 legislators who are facing the potential recall. If the recall is successful, then there'd have to be a by-election within 3 months. And it's possible that if this is successful, that the DPP could take a majority in the legislature. But that's very speculative. One thing that's very important to keep in mind is that the threshold to successfully recall a legislator is very high. The yes vote has to be at least 25% of the eligible voters in the constituency, and it has to be greater than the no vote, of course. So this threshold of 25% agreeing to the recall is very high to reach.
Yes, Ross, China calling all of this futile ahead of what they say is an inevitable reunification. But do you think this will be something China is welcoming, given that there could be further instability in Taiwan and potentially a change in government?
Spokespeople for the Chinese government agencies that oversee relations with Taiwan, as well as the state media in China, they've criticized the recall because they see it as an attempt by President Li's DPP to take control of the legislative branch of government as well, and then give them power over the executive branch and the legislative branch. So actually, China has criticized the recall, which has resulted in some negative attention for the KMT, because one of the other justifications for the recall is people say that the KMT is too accommodating towards China. And then you have China officials and media saying that the recall is bad. So that's actually become a talking point for the people in support of the recall to say, you see, China is against the recall. They must really be too close to the KMT legislators, thus they need to be recalled.
Ross, thank you ever so much for that insight. We will, of course, continue to monitor it. You also will be staying with us. As we move on now, as Britain's Defence Secretary John Healey has declared the UK's commitment to Australia absolute during high-level defence and foreign minister talks in Sydney. These talks focused on strengthening the AUKUS partnership, boosting trade and signing a major treaty on nuclear submarine production. Defence Minister Richard Marles called the new treaty with Britain Australia's most significant since Federation. Valued at up to £20 billion, it will support submarine programmes for 50 years and create tens of thousands of jobs. Let's now listen to Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles and what he had to say.
We are on the brink of concluding a treaty between our two countries in respect of AUKUS and Australia acquiring a nuclear-powered submarine capability. This is a bilateral treaty between Australia and the UK, which gives expression to the trilateral treaty that our three countries signed in the United States, in Washington, D.C. in August of last year. It is as significant a treaty as has been signed between our two countries since Federation.
British and Australian officials have also agreed to cooperate on critical minerals, cybersecurity and extend training for Ukraine's forces. After the talks, ministers will visit Melbourne and Darwin, where the UK's HMS Prince of Wales is participating in Talisman Sabre war games. That's alongside 40,000 troops from 19 countries. Healey warned that threats facing Europe could easily shift to the Indo-Pacific. Well, Ross, thank you for staying with us. I want to pick up on that final statement there from Healey, talking about the fact that the current conflict and uncertainty in Europe could come to the Indo-Pacific. How significant is this deal in the face of that warning from Australia?
Clearly, Australia has recognized the need for the nuclear-powered submarine capability as part of protecting Australia from the one threat in this region. The one threat is China. The interesting thing, though, is that there's been recent reports that the United States has sought assurances from Australia that if there's a war over Taiwan, Australia would join that war as well. So it's possible the United States is looking at the AUKUS arrangement as one not just where Australia would guard its own shores, but would come to the assistance of the United States in trying to defend Taiwan from a Chinese invasion. Now, that's very much in the air. That was reported. It wasn't really confirmed by the governments involved. And of course, as has been widely reported, the United States government is conducting a review of the AUKUS arrangement at the moment, and we simply don't know what the outcome of that review is going to be. But be that as it may, Australia and the UK today have obviously sent a very strong signal that as far as those two countries are concerned, the AUKUS arrangement is meant to be one that's going to last for decades.
Yes, Ross Feingold, as always, thank you so much for joining us and providing that unique insight there. We now move on, though. And Typhoon Komay made landfall in the Philippines, which has caused flooding across cities that include Luzon and leaving a trail of destruction. At least 25 people have died, mostly due to flash floods, landslides and fallen trees. Almost 300,000 residents have been forced to evacuate. Roads and homes are submerged and nearly 3,000 houses have been damaged. Flights have been cancelled, schools closed, and 77 areas have declared a state of calamity. Rescue operations are now underway as more heavy rain is expected. Authorities are urging the public to remain alert and follow emergency warnings. We head over to North America now, and a Canadian court has found 5 former NHL players not guilty of sexual assault, ending a high-profile case tied to Canada's 2018 World Junior Hockey team. Michael McLeod, Alex Formanton, Dylan Dubé, Carter Hart and Cal Foote were accused of sexually assaulting a woman known as E.M. in a London hotel room following a Hockey Canada gala. McLeod also faced and was acquitted of an additional charge of being party to the offence. The judge ruled the complainant's testimony was not credible or reliable. The NHL has suspended the players from league while they review the case. The scandal has triggered national outrage, a reopened police investigation and major reforms at Hockey Canada, which froze funding and replaced its leadership. Well, that is all we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest breaking news from across the world. Thank you.